India's civilizational narrative reshaping its internal image and external positioning written by Rathiag as colonial frameworks fade. India's civilizational narrative is driving a cultural renaissance. From diplomacy to self-image, Bharat is crafting its story through tradition, heritage, and values that speak to a global and local audience. International relations are often seen as being driven only by geopolitics. However, a country's civilizational perspective is just as critical in global affairs. Indeed, most countries strive to incorporate their cultural values into both their internal governance and their international relations. For example, China has a rich national narrative that draws heavily from its ancient cultural and civilizational achievements. Similarly, the United States has its powerful narrative built around the idea of the American dream, a nation that welcomes people from around the world while still maintaining a distinct sense of what it means to be American. India, as one of the world's oldest living civilizations, possesses a unique advantage in its rich and continuous civilizational legacy. For a nation that has endured centuries of invasions and colonization, using a civilizational lens for both internal identity and international engagement is not just important, it is essential. Yet, after independence, the Nehruvian establishment largely sidelined this heritage. Instead of celebrating India's ancient wisdom and cultural strengths, it promoted a version of Indianness, rooted in Western ideals and modernity. This often came at the cost of distancing from India's Hindu civilizational identity. For decades, a left-liberal narrative defined India's global image, portraying it as a post-colonial state and even glorifying the cultural influence of past Islamic rulers. English became the language of diplomacy and elite discourse, while anything rooted in Indian languages, traditions, or ethos was seen as backward or regressive. But over the past decade, things have changed dramatically. With the advent of a confident Hindu resurgence, Bharat is now reclaiming its civilizational roots. From the grand inauguration of the Ayodhya Ram Mandir to rising global interest in events like the Maha Kumbh 2025, a new narrative is emerging, one that proudly places India's cultural and civilizational identity at the heart of both national and global discourse. In the following sections, we discuss how Bharat's civilizational narrative is shaping the dynamics of its internal paradigms and global positioning. India's global reset. India has ancient civilizational linkages with regions such as Greece, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia. There exist many affinities between Hinduism and pre-Christian religious traditions in ancient Greece. Both India and Greece drew from each other's vast repositories of knowledge in fields like science and astronomy. Rigveda, for example, has texts on astronomy that were of great interest to Greek astronomers. Additionally, within the Greek astronomical tradition, India is credited with contributing to the naming of the days of the week and the precise calculation of the year's length. Similarly, ancient India and Mesopotamia had maritime trade links. Historical sources suggest that the Mesopotamians explored aspects of Hindu Dharma to gain a deeper understanding of the Indian subcontinent. The discovery of Indus Valley seals and motifs in Mesopotamia serves as clear evidence of the deep cultural and commercial exchanges between these two great ancient civilizations. As India increasingly incorporates the civilizational perspective in its global outreach and international diplomacy, the dynamics of its bilateral engagement with various countries essentially draw from the vast reservoir of ancient civilizational linkages. India's civilizational narrative is increasingly emerging as a cornerstone of its soft power and is actively shaping its global outreach. A notable example of this strategic use of cultural heritage is seen in the strengthening India-Greece relationship, where shared civilizational values are being used to deepen diplomatic ties. In February 2025, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, met with his Greek counterpart, George Dharma, in New Delhi for high-level talks. During the meeting, Dr. Jaishankar highlighted India's expanding engagement with Greece, while Dharma affirmed Greece's interest in enhancing ties across multiple sectors, including tourism, culture, and trade. During Indian Prime Minister Modi's visit to Greece in August 2023, his Greek counterpart, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, spoke of the ancient civilizational linkages between the two countries, fondly recalling the ancient trade routes and the path of Alexander the Great. He also emphasized that the Indian and Greek civilizations share a similar set of values, including peace, justice, and democracy. Prime Minister Modi also spoke of the significance of India's ancient civilizational heritage and Greece's, drawing a symbolic and emotionally resonant parallel between Kashi and Athens. In a significant archaeological excavation that establishes further civilizational links between ancient India and Greece, artifacts from the era of the Indo-Greek king Apollodotus were unearthed during excavations by researchers in Vadnagar in 2024. India and Greece have found common ground in yet another core civilizational issue, the quest for the reclamation of artifacts from the UK. According to media reports, India has spearheaded a global initiative to extend support to victims of colonial appropriation, a move that could play a crucial role in enabling the permanent return of the Parthenon sculptures, also known as the Elgin marbles, to Greece, which are currently part of the British Museum collection. Prime Minister Modi's recent visits to Cyprus and Croatia are also rooted in the dynamics of India's civilizational and cultural narrative. Although much of the analysis decoding these visits has put the spotlight on the geopolitical and strategic angle, the civilizational perspective is as much a part of this equation. A recent article published by Organizer provides fascinating insights into the civilizational linkages between India and Cyprus. It narrates the compelling story of Laila Erolkar, the former First Lady of Cyprus who was born in Ahmedabad, earlier known as Karnavati, and was of Indian Jewish descent. Laila Erolkar's father, Dr. Abraham Erolkar, served as Mahatma Gandhi's personal physician during his stay in London in 1946. Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Cyprus should be viewed as a significant step in India's broader quest to preserve its cultural and civilizational values. Turkey's no-holds-barred support for Pakistan also translates into unequivocal support for its jihadi machinery targeting India. Thus, India's reiteration of support for respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Cyprus and Cyprus's expression of solidarity with India in its fight against terrorism is not merely a strategic exchange, but a civilizational dialogue aimed at protecting the core values of two civilizations from the onslaught of brute and extremist forces. In this age of media blitzkrieg, individual gestures rooted in the tradition of mutual understanding and respect invariably turn into powerful statements signifying an intercultural civilizational dialogue. A striking example of this was the extraordinary gesture of a Cypriot lawmaker who touched Prime Minister Modi's feet when he arrived at the center of Nicosia. The Indian Prime Minister's historic visit to Croatia also marked a moment of civilizational reckoning. Croatia is known for its sustained academic interest in Indic culture and civilization. The world's first printed Sanskrit grammar book was published by the Croatian scholar Ivan Filip Vesdin. Croatia has also largely supported India's civilizational goals. The country supports India's bid for permanent membership in the UNSC. It has also maintained a non-interventionist policy regarding India's internal issues, including those in Jammu and Kashmir. The welcoming of Prime Minister Modi with the chanting of the Gayatri Mantra in Zagreb, Croatia, delivered a powerful message of civilizational solidarity to the global community. India's civilizational narrative is not only becoming an increasingly proactive part of its foreign policy, but countries across the world are also trying to woo India by connecting with its civilizational values, at least in terms of optics. Act East policy. A civilizational perspective since 2014, the Act East policy has been central to India's strategy, enhancing ties with Southeast Asia by reviving ancient civilizational links to promote development and regional stability through shared cultural heritage. The Ramayana has emerged as the de facto civilizational bridge between India and Southeast Asia. Locally, adapted versions, like Ramkir in Cambodia, Yama Zatdo in Myanmar, Hikayat Seri Rama in Malaysia, and Ramakian in Thailand, reflect its deep cultural integration. Even today, Thailand's king is referred to as Rama and is believed to be a reincarnation of the Hindu deity Vishnu. Traditional puppet theaters like Wayang still depict Ramayana and Mahabharata stories across the region. During his visit to Thailand in April, the Indian Prime Minister attended a performance of the local Ramayana known colloquially as Ramakian. It was an innovative retelling, drawing from the artistic and cultural traditions of both India and Thailand, a distinct fusion of Thailand's Khon dance form and India's Bharatanatyam. The shared cultural and civilizational legacy of the two countries was, in fact, the highlight of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Thailand. The Indian Prime Minister also visited Thailand's historic Wat Pho temple along with his Thai counterpart, Padingtarn Shinawat, known for its unique architecture and the massive statue of the reclining Buddha. In a symbolic gesture highlighting ancient civilizational ties between India and Thailand, he also presented a replica of the Ashokan lion capital to the reclining Buddha shrine. Thus, the common civilizational legacy represented by myriad traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism became the focal point of Indian Prime Minister's Thailand visit. The joint declaration also acknowledged the deep civilizational, cultural, religious, and linguistic bonds and 78 years of establishment of diplomatic ties between India and Thailand. Southeast Asia has become a high-priority area for India's global diplomacy over the past couple of years. In 2024, Prime Minister Modi visited Singapore and Brunei, and the Malaysian and Vietnamese prime ministers visited India. The geopolitical thrust of India's Act East policy is the consolidation of its Indo-Pacific strategy focused on promoting an open, inclusive, and rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific region. However, the policy also has an unmistakable civilizational thrust characterized by the enduring civilizational bonds between India and Southeast Asia and their potential to create a compelling civilizational narrative that challenges the Eurocentric worldview rooted in colonial frames. India and the global South. The old global order is rapidly disintegrating, and while it may be early to define the new one, the groundwork for a major shift is already underway. Central to this transformation is the rising consolidation of the global South around shared civilizational and cultural narratives. This emerging unity is poised to play a pivotal role in reshaping the future world order, shifting away from Eurocentric dominance toward a more inclusive, decolonial framework that draws on the intellectual and cultural traditions of the global South. A key shift in India's foreign policy over the past decade has been its active leadership in giving the global South a unified voice. In January 2023, India hosted the Voice of Global South Summit, a landmark initiative that brought together countries with shared development concerns and cultural ties. Further strengthening its role, India used its G20 presidency in 2023 to spotlight the needs of the global South. The most significant achievement was the induction of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20, a proposal initially championed by India, marking a major diplomatic success and a defining moment in global geopolitics. For decades, Nehruvian narratives overshadowed India's cultural identity with Eurocentric views. However, over the past decade, India's global outlook has increasingly reflected its ancient civilizational ethos, aligning geopolitics with cultural roots to shape a more authentic and influential global presence. Thus, in its engagement with the global South, India is extensively drawing from the vast repertoire of common civilizational traditions and experiences, similar experiences with colonization and imperialism. Similarities in spiritual and religious traditions. Africa and Latin America had diverse religious traditions closer to Hinduism before the advent of Christianity in these countries, a similar value system prioritizing community well-being over individualism, rich history of oral traditions, and the existence of a rich body of non-Western knowledge systems, art, and cultural traditions. As India consolidates the global South on issues like climate change, economic development, poverty alleviation, trade, reform of multilateral institutions like the UN, energy security, terrorism and extremism, world peace and security, etc., it's important to keep in mind that the leveraging of the common civilizational narrative is the key to addressing all these issues. As a collective of nations still grappling with the lasting impacts of colonization and imperialism, the global South's civilizational perspective is shaped by its aspiration to build a more just and equitable world order grounded in decolonial values. Among these nations, India stands out as perhaps the only one where native traditions not only endured but continued to flourish despite colonial domination. This enduring cultural continuity, particularly the revival of India's Hindu civilizational heritage, gives India a unique advantage. It enables India to lead efforts in fostering solidarity among the global South through a shared civilizational lens. Bharat reclaims itself. India's repositioning through the lens of its civilizational identity has also transformed its internal self-perception. This shift marks a return to the idea of Bharat, a deeper connection to its cultural roots and heritage. The grand inauguration of the Ayodhya Ram Mandir in January 2024 symbolized more than just the restoration of Bhagwan Ram's birthplace. It represented a civilizational resurgence. The event echoed the triumph of Dharma over Adharma, exposing decades of anti-Hindu and anti-Bharat narratives and reaffirmed the spiritual soul, Atma, of a resurgent, self-aware Indian civilization. The inauguration of the Ayodhya Ram Mandir, along with several other developments, such as the rapid rise in temple tourism, the revival of Sambhal's Hindu roots, the growing global interest in Maha Kumbh 2025, the large-scale restoration of ancient temples, and India's growing emphasis on projecting its soft power through its civilizational legacy, have together reshaped the way India is seen, both within and outside the country. Indians today feel a renewed sense of pride in their civilizational values, and this pride is gradually transforming India's overall image on the global stage as a culturally rich and spiritually rooted nation. This shift in India's self-image is now also influencing the sphere of governance. A powerful example of this was the installation of the historic Sengal beside the Speaker's chair during the inauguration of India's new Parliament building in May 2023. The Sengal, a golden scepter, is a traditional symbol of just and righteous rule, once used by the Chola kings to represent fair governance. Originally presented to India's first Prime Minister at the time of independence, its placement in Parliament more than 70 years later marks a symbolic transfer of authority from colonial frameworks to governance rooted in India's civilizational ideals and dharmic values. The enactment of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, 2023, marks a major step in decolonizing India's legal system by replacing colonial-era criminal laws. British rule had deliberately imposed a legal framework rooted in Western ideals, sidelining India's traditional approach to justice. In contrast, the new code shifts the focus from dand, punishment, to nyaya, justice, reflecting a return to India's civilizational values, where law was seen as a means to uphold dharma, not merely enforce authority. This reorientation is part of a broader wave of civilizational resurgence influencing governance and policy in recent years. The Indian Armed Forces have undergone key reforms, shedding outdated colonial practices and embracing more indigenous traditions. The National Education Policy 2020 similarly aims to transform India's education system by integrating Bharatiya knowledge systems and perspectives. There has been a conscious effort to restore the civilizational identity of public spaces. Several cities and locations have been renamed to reflect Indic heritage instead of colonial legacy. Cultural initiatives, such as the Kashi Tamil Sangamam, have further reinforced the deep-rooted civilizational unity between different regions of India, particularly between the North and South. Together, these reforms signal a meaningful civilizational shift in India's governance ethos, from imitation to reclamation. Wrapping up, although India's internal image and its external positioning are being increasingly shaped by its civilizational and cultural narratives, the intellectual poisoning are now fully visible in contemporary woke culture, where anti-Brahmin sentiment has been repackaged in the language of progressivism, feminism, and social justice. In modern Indian films, especially in regional and left-leaning cinema, the Brahmin is portrayed with clinical consistency as a manipulative priest, a lecherous landlord, or a smirking oppressor, a figure of disdain with no inner world, no ethical struggle, no complexity. Rarely, if ever, does the screen portray the Brahmin as a saintly teacher, a sacrificing scholar, or a freedom fighter, roles they have historically occupied in Western sensibilities. Thus, for the civilizational and cultural reawakening of India to come full circle, it is important that Indians from all walks of life increasingly draw from the treasure trove of their civilization and culture to engage in authentic storytelling that narrates the true glory of Bharat on the world stage. Grammar, temple rituals, yoga, Ayurveda, and even family values. In essence, It becomes a blanket term for anything remotely dharmic, a stand-in for Hinduism itself. Social media has further amplified this trend. Hashtags like #Smash Brahminical Patriarchy are less about actual reform and more about creating a digitally sanctioned outlet for civilizational self-hate. Ironically, many of the most vocal participants in this anti-Brahmin discourse are urban, English-speaking elites, often hailing from privileged caste backgrounds themselves.